We understand that there can be trauma from social events, from financial events, from physical events, from emotional experiences, from perception, meaning without anything happening, the belief that one will die, that one's survival is in jeopardy, is a traumatic belief. And the physiology in our body shifts, not just because of a traumatic event, but because of a perceived traumatic event. And what I want to do is explore the equations of trauma. How is it that we, inside our minds, our hearts, our bodies, piece together the language, the vocabulary of trauma to produce a traumatic impact in the body? So the first thing that we need to look at is shame. Shame is the phenomena of being excluded from the circle. That which is shameful is beyond the pale. It is outside of acceptable behavior. It is disowned. So what is shameful is that which is, in many ways, the shadow of the cult. That which is too beautiful or too ugly, too evolved or too hideous to be acknowledged as being part of the cult. Now, the emphasis should be on acknowledged, because if someone in their thoughts, their feelings, and behavior is feeling, thinking, and behaving a certain way, then by definition, if they are part of the cult, this trait, this formula, is within the cult. So it becomes a shadow element and an element of shame when someone embodies a trait that is within the cult, but which the cult doesn't want to own. Now, it's also useful to remember that there have been approximately 10,000 cults in human history, 10,000 languages according to anthropologists. And so we each have a cult. Every human being in history has been born into a cult that believes certain things and refuses to believe other things. It's also a fact that every cult is incomplete. Every cult emphasizes certain traits, certain values, certain beliefs, while de-emphasizing others. Intelligent cults tend to focus on and value and elevate traits that are helpful at that moment in time and in that culture's history for its survival, security, love and belonging, sense of self-esteem, developing of unique resources and talents within the human being, disseminating those within the community, and ultimately moving beyond the narrow focus on the self as we move into our elder years, and in turn and in time focus on something bigger than ourselves, move into the last of our human needs, of transcendence, that on legacy, something beyond the limitations of a given ego and a given body. These are human needs, fundamental to all human beings throughout culture. And so cultures, for example, like our own, which emphasize masculine energy, hopefully do so originally at a time when masculine energy helps with the cult's survival. However, as we see with our fixation on, for example, alpha men, we're in an age where the creativity, the symmetry, the collaborative nature of a new idea, be it a Facebook, a Google, or any other paradigm-shifting idea, is far more significant for the cult's survival than having a brawn and stalking along in a modern world with a giant body. So the emphasis on brawn in many ways is a cultural legacy. It's not actually serving the needs of the cult today. But cults tending to be past thinking, cults having a lag time between the bleeding edge of reality and participating in a technical equation in which the majority has never been correct. The lagging of a cult as it catches up with its environment creates this dynamic where by the time the majority understands and accepts and agrees with something, it's no longer correct because it's no longer the most direct and efficient response to the new environment. When Silicon Valley was just getting started in the, if we zero in on the U.S. cult dynamics over the last few decades, a startup mentality was very uncool. Garage, working long hours, computers, this was not cool stuff. You should be a banker or an attorney or something more civilized because at a certain point about 100 years ago, bankers were really significant in shaping cultures, etc. And so, the cult lagging behind itself, 50 to 100 years on average, we're catching up, but now, of course, it's very cool to have a startup, and there's lots of capital, and as we saw with the 2002 meltdown, once it became cool, then you have the frenzy, you have the discard, the shame, the discouragement, then there's a proven model, then it flips the other way, from fear into greed, in investor terminology, then you have that frenzy of everyone wants to have a .com, so pour millions into pets.com even while it's losing money. Pour millions into carpets.com, whether they have anything to sell or not. It's all about the flip into the new paradigm irrationally without groundedness. And then you realize there's certain things that, certain service businesses, if you're good at what you do, make a lot more money than all this frenetic activity to make money online, because that's, of course, also another trend. So cults are rarely in sync with the actual bleeding edge of technology, ecology, science. The majority is in many ways following years or decades behind what was an intelligent thing at a given moment in time. And we have this bell curve dynamic. Innovation, a bleeding edge of people that are rejected and discouraged, etc. The number of people that rejected a Facebook or even more so a Google was immense. No one wanted to invest. No one wanted to invest. There's no money in search. And then, of course, it flips at some point. So you have a bleeding edge minority that by definition nobody agrees with because it's bucking the majority trend. Then it's proven. Then slowly the majority catches on. And by the time that they do, there's something new that's bleeding edge. And so the majority is never correct. The majority is always wrong. But the majority is also safe because, for example, in the stock market, it doesn't matter the fact that the majority is wrong. The stocks that the majority invest in wrongly will be more, will have more money in a competitive marketplace of supply and demand than the stocks that are more correct choices that are not yet favored by a majority because a majority lags behind the bleeding edge of the minority. And so you have this tension between the safety of the majority coming from the fact that more and more of our environment is not anything to do with our skill wrestling rhinoceroses or outrunning a lion or poisoning a black mamba snake or climbing up a coconut tree to get fresh water for the next week's survival. There's less and less of our environment that has anything to do with our survival, connecting directly with nature. And much more of our survival has to do with connecting with other people. So in other words, if a vast majority of other people say that that person is cool, now even that, if you look at the coolness and empathic continuum, we are, as a cult, still worshiping the sociopathic end of the empathic sociopathic continuum. It is the reptilian brain that is the most cool, the most cold. Snakes don't have feelings. They don't even have warm blood. But in a sociopathic environment, being detached, unemotional, being cool is a competitive advantage. And so in a sociopathic cult, the cult, particularly in teenage years, will worship that which, transcends pain by not having feelings. Who's the coolest person around? The person who doesn't get embarrassed, who doesn't get flustered, who sets the trends, who demands other people, who doesn't care about other people's feelings. Oh, I wish I could be like that. I'm so emotional myself. I'm so afraid of this and unknown about this. I wish I could be sociopathic. I wish I could be cool, cold, dissociative, and not be bothered by any of the stuff that I'm bothered with. And so to be cool, elevated within a sociopathic cult, becomes it's self-referential. Everyone wants to be cool because everyone wants to be cool. Well, as soon as you have a healthy environment, coolness is no longer an asset. If you have people that are raised in emotionally literate cultures, in traumatically literate cultures, in relationally literate cultures, you have an incredible dynamic of warmth and creativity and beauty and love. And so you want to feel all that, because the more you rise on the empathic, the sociopathic empathic continuum, now you want to get away from being cool, cold, sociopathic, not having any feelings and not caring. And you want to care, you want to feel, you want to respond. Why? Because you're in a warm environment. You're in an empathic environment where the more you feel, the more pleasure, the more happiness, the more joy, the more tenderness, the more gratitude you feel, because you're in an environment that evokes those feelings. The more pain, misery, humiliation, helplessness, despair, terror, etc., that the environment is inducing in our children, in our elderly, in our women, in our young boys, the more that we are inducing those feelings, the more it is natural to aspire to being cold, to being dissociative, to not caring, to being cool. So, and competency, one of the benefits of the reptilian brain is that you get a profound lucidity. When you're terrified and filled with grief, you often can't move. But if all of those feelings just go away and you enter the reptilian brainstem, you just do the math and say, okay, the boat is sinking. My odds will go up if I do this, 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 and this. And there's no regard for other people, except in a political ladder climbing. And similarly, in a sociopathic environment, if you're traumatized as a child and you understand that people in power are the only people that matter, one of the most interesting cycles in our culture is the cycle between the people who are most traumatized into helplessness as a child, the Saddam Hussein, the Stalin, the Hitler, that are most traumatized, the Donald Trump, the most traumatized as a child, with the fascination with escaping the traumatic cycle in a sociopathic culture by ascending to the very position of power that they witnessed being above them as a child. To ascend within the cult political power structure or cult ranking structure to a point where their safety comes from occupying a position, which is only, of course, relevant in cults that put positions ahead of human beings. If you have a cult that is, very much about rank and where people at the bottom are discarded, used, abused, etc., and people at the top are protected at all cost. The President of the United States is the only one who cannot be indicted for obstruction of justice and this, that, and the other. So when you have a dynamic that's role-based rather than than feeling-based, like I'm a human being, you're a human being, so it's human-based. So you matter just as much as me, and I matter just as much as you because we're human beings. In a role-based cult, the fact that you're a human being doesn't matter at all. When we have millions of American homeless, it's not because they're not human beings. It's because they don't have money. And so you have a ranking system that says that people who have money are in the role of customers. And a customer is this very, very important role. So you may not let your spouse talk to you like this. You may not like this person. But a customer, once you're in a role-based cult, and as soon as you've got money to spend and you are a customer, you get to treat me worse than my own husband. Why? Because it's a role-based cult. As soon as we're in a role-based cult, then it doesn't matter that you've broken the law, etc., etc. You're a policeman, so of course you can break the law. Because it's not a human-based cult. It's a role-based cult. And policemen can't obstruct justice and do this and fire the FBI and all that, but the president can. And so, of course, the more traumatized you are as a child and the more abused you are by roles of authority, the more you aspire to do whatever it takes to ascend the political and cultural ranking ladder so that you are at the top, so that you don't have to face the unresolved trauma, the unresolved helplessness. The amount of humiliation inflicted on Saddam Hussein by his father, intense, regular, heart-rending humiliation, which, of course, nobody cared about because he was a shepherd, he was a farmer, he was just a boy. Boys don't matter. Farmers don't matter. Shepherds don't matter. Poor people don't matter. So why the fuck should we give a damn about young Saddam Hussein? Now, we don't give a damn about him until he's got a position of high rank. Then, of course, in that position of high rank, the cycle completes itself. The cult that abandoned the boy is abandoned by the role of the dictator, by the role of the president, who discharges back to the cult the same pattern given to him by the cult. You treat the innocence of a boy, of a human being, well as a child. And first of all, most people don't want to aspire to such a sociopathic position because there are so many abused people competing for the role of leaders to escape the terror of never being in a low-ranking position again. I mean, who would want to be president? 18-hour days, not a very great salary, blamed for everything, having to know stuff you can't possibly know, guaranteed to make endless numbers of mistakes. Who on earth would want the cruelty of that position except for someone absolutely driven never to feel that helpless, etc. again, and to be at the top, to be the one feeling like if I was in that position, I'd be valuable. Most people aren't willing to lie and betray friends and do all the different ranking things to climb to the top of a sociopathic power structure. There's a whole host of different things, but the people who have been traumatized, abused, etc. the most are very motivated to do whatever it is to the top, including, make up stuff, lies, break laws, murders, et cetera, along the way, to a point where an ethical, kind, empathic person would have a little bit of an unlikely, it wouldn't be normal for a kind, empathic human being that was sensitive to other people, particularly in a fear-based dynamic, because in a traumatic cult, the politician that incites the most fear of the unknown, and then promises to answer that fear, tends to be elected, which is one reason presidents cause wars, is, there is a war and I will protect you. The fact that we caused the war by all kinds of manner of things is neither here nor there. There is a war and I will protect you. A war on terror, a war on drugs. There is a war. We made it. We made the war when we reclassified, medicinal plants as Schedule I drugs and then went out to kill it. We made the war when we raised CIA money with crack cocaine in black neighborhoods. But the fact that we're making the war doesn't matter. There's these horrible, predators out there, and I'm the only one who can save you. And the fact that parents traumatize their children into terror and then say, you better do what I say, or, my whole protection is off, etc. It's the same dynamic. The more traumatizing the culture, the more rank-based the culture, the more we desperately seek to be a high enough rank. I don't want to be in that category of the human being who doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I don't want to be completely invisible in that amount of pain again. And so as our global structure shifts more towards cultural dynamics than ecological dynamics, the majority, the sanction of the majority becomes the haven for survival, security, love and belonging, and self-esteem, which is often an internalized version of outside validation. You see, when I arrived home in England, having purchased my first TV for 5p, or pence, or the English word for penny, for 5p, in a raffle at the church jumble sale, I noticed I was the only one bidding for the TV, and so I put 5 pennies, and I won the bid because it was near the end of the sale and nobody else had bid anything. Well, this was talked about right and left throughout the whole, quote, spiritual community. I was living in West Hoathly at a Waldorf-oriented community. All the Waldorf parents, this little event. And then I sold the TV to an older boy for £5, and so this, in a capitalist cult, turning five pennies into $5, it's like this huge, and so there was this big, comment, and adults who paid no attention to me. Otherwise, you're going to make it, in this cult, etc., because we're a money-based cult. And so when you understand that, I could do a beautiful drawing and, much like Adolf Hitler, get zero interest. I could do this and this and this and get zero interest. Or I could turn 5 pennies into $5 and, suddenly I matter in a cult that elevates money. Every cult does these little hierarchies in different ways. You see, in Africa, I would be in the same situation in certain tribes. I did a nice drawing, nothing. I had a beautiful meditation, nothing. I went out and enjoyed the sunset, nothing. I didn't fight and win a fight, nothing. I cut a hole in my mouth and I have a bigger plate in my mouth than the next guy. Suddenly, oh, you have a giant plate in your mouth. Wow. Such great dexterity. You will be a great tribal leader. You've got a big plate in your mouth as opposed to a small plate. oh, you were genitally mutilated faster and more bravely than all the other girls that were genitally mutilated. Maybe you will be a tribal leader, so in our cult, it's you turned 5 pennies into $5. Amazing. The peak of the Western cult, to turn bits of paper into more bits of paper. Others, of course, being winning in sports, but every cult has its little dynamic. But the thing is, you see, people in our cult, as we shift away from being dependent on our bodies and natural environment, etc., to being dependent on the approval of other human beings, we don't get to decide. I didn't get to decide that me turning 5 pennies into $5 would be the talk of the community. The cult decided that. What I get to decide once I discover that the cult is, very interested in this and not at all interested in that, and that repeated, by the way, in various ways, then all I get to decide is, do I want to keep doing the thing that my cult thinks is so amazing, or do I want to go back and become invisible? Now, when you're a child living at home and your parents, as I was at the time, this isn't quite such a big pressure. But when you're a business owner, and all these, you're in a cult where, for example, 70% of all small businesses fail. 70% of all restaurants fail within 3 years, for example. And, then do you want to be one of those failures, or do you want to be someone like me who's run a successful business for 25 years and knows how to do that? And again, if you want to succeed, if you care about survival and security and a sense of love and belonging, because then there's a whole group of mating partners who will not mate with you if you don't succeed. As Jordan Peterson says, women have controlled the species and whose genetics gets passed on throughout time by simply deciding who they're going to have sex with. So women decide that people with a high earning power get more sex. Well, they are shifting the evolution of the species into people capable of creating money. And for the biological animal in each one of us, it's very difficult to have a sense of love and belonging if no one will mate with us. And it's very difficult to have a sense of self-esteem if no one will mate with us. It's very difficult to have a sense of self-esteem when the traits deemed to be mateable, for men it has long been, for a large percentage of females, the amount of social ranking and the amount of money. And of course there's a mix between physical attractiveness, political power, financial power, and respect, as well as the interdimension, the intercommunication skills of an individual. But for many, it doesn't matter the intercommunication skills if you don't have a job, or nobody likes you, or you have an appearance that you're never going to make me look good. In a sociopathic cult, where if I don't look good, my survival, my security, my sense of love and belonging, my sense of self-esteem is just not very secure. And so I'm at survival at a core level in an environment that's not going to take care of me because I'm a human being. It's only going to take care of me if I appeal to the majority. And it is this dynamic, it's the dynamic of a history in which we have exterminated entire peoples simply by calling them barbarians, by calling them savages. Like, how did the British know that the Northern Irish were savages? This term beyond the pale. as the British came over into Ireland and fought for the South and established civilized society, high tea and this and that and uncomfortable top hats and whatever it was that was very civilized. And then there was this certain point they just couldn't dominate the whole thing, so they built this stone wall, which is called a pale. And so and then they defended against the unknown, against Wiccan and magic and mystery and ritual and a wide eclectic range of pagan beliefs. That was out. We'll kill anyone. We'll burn them at the stake. We'll etc. We're gonna, but beyond the pale, all bets are off. So just don't go there. If you're a civilized person, you don't want to be found beyond the pale, beyond the stone wall that we maintain as the civilized cult. And in the discovery of Americas, the stopping off at some of the tropical islands along the way, the discovery of a beautiful tribe that was non-materialistic. There was gold. They just weren't obsessed about it. And the slaughter of more than 90% of those women, the rape, the slaughter, the butchery of more than 90% of what was actually a matriarchal culture, simply to get gold, because the cult decided that gold was more important than human beings. Obviously a very low-ranking cult in terms of objective intelligence. You just have to take it to the logical conclusion and imagine that you're the richest white man in the world, but you've got no one, that you've killed everyone else along the way. Because we all know, of course, that money is more important than human beings, and so even when there were just two human beings left, you had to pay, they were probably working for you and taking your money, so you kill them so that you don't have to share any of it, and now you've got a pile of useless metal and paper that you finally discover is as useless as it is, that absolutely none of it is useful unless you have human beings that are willing to share in your joint belief that it is valuable. And if they're willing to work their asses off, for these bits of paper, then you've got the value provided by human beings in their belief. You have no value in bits of paper. You have the value in other people's willingness to help you. And without that, your survival statistics go down. Now, if we go back, a few 100,000 years, a few million years into the human-animal period, or if we, take a flight across, to some of our species' origins, and we see the monkeys in the trees, the pack mammalian group still serves as deep biological survival. And it's worth noting that within the human being, there is a tremendous legacy. The reptilian brain is 200 million years old, and it kept us alive in that crocodile reptilian period. That bit doesn't get knocked off by some new age, 10,000-year-old brain that says, let's all do this instead, etc. Because that new age brain didn't help a crocodile survive. Help thy neighbor, that's only 2,000 years. That didn't help the other crocodiles do anything. If you shared the deer that you killed with your neighbor, they ate it, took all of it, and then once they had more energy than you because they ate all of your food, they then attacked you because you were now malnourished for your generosity, and they stabbed you in the back and ate you. And so that didn't survive very well in the reptilian brain period. And the reptilian brain comes on when we are surrounded by sociopaths. When we are in a sociopathic environment, the survival will be in jeopardy when we operate from the empathic brain. And so, you see the descent into humanity in Nazi Germany, where the Jewish people, reduced into a reptilian brainstem, are facilitating most of the work in a concentration camp dedicated to the murder of its people. But you survive another few days. You survive a little bit longer if you cooperate with your captors. That sociopathic environment induces the reptilian brain. It says you're not surrounded by human beings. You will die if you behave like a human being. You may survive if you behave like a reptile. And I'm here for you. I know how reptiles work, and so I am here for you. I will guide you in what to do and not do out of fear, out of anger and fear. And whichever one is stronger, I will generally be accurate in whether fight or flight or freezing is going to help you in this situation. But it is basically the devolution of the species to a 200 million year old brain that a civilized cult does not need anymore. But we are not a civilized cult. And there are many areas where the majority is at such a point on the empathic sociopathic continuum. And it's not always across the board. Like you find these wonderful people that are absolutely wonderful until it comes time to deal with their own shame. Suddenly they turn into reptiles because they do not know how to empathically relate to that part of themselves. They know how to relate as a violator, internalizing the abuse of their parents, their cult, etc., towards themselves. So if you engage with them in this one area, the Germans were very witty, warm, and social if you didn't happen to be Jewish. If you didn't happen to be against Adolf Hitler. Oh, well, sportsmen, the warm Christmas gifts, it's just this one area where, again, Hitler did not know how to embrace the weakness in him because every area of his own weakness had been so brutalized that he identified with the abuser to escape the helplessness that he felt as a boy. He hated the boy who couldn't stand up to a giant. A 6-year-old boy is never going to win with a 60-foot giant. And that's what a brutal father is to a 6-year-old boy. When that mercilessness, in part fueled on by the Allies' scarcity environment, because the more you threaten survival, the more you reduce a people down into a reptilian brainstem. And so, when, after the First World War, etc., when Germany was brought to its knees, and, literally, people eating leather, having nothing to eat, feeling shame and humiliation, saddled with the debts of Europe, no opportunity for, the amount of cruelty going down on the children, creates a reptilian brainstem that says, I know how to survive in reptiles, it's to beat them at their own game. That's the only way to win in a reptilian sociopathic environment. And so in that sense, the world creating an environment that would lead to intense brutality towards German children. Now, the sociopathic nature of our cult is such that anything feminine we don't deal with. We don't deal with emotional literacy. It's an entire science of physiology. Every single human action in human history has come from a feeling. If you didn't have that feeling, not a single muscle worked in your conscious mind. That for conscious action, you can still get people to jump out of the way with unconscious reflexes, etc. But for, a skyscraper to be built, for art, for a necklace to be imagined, for a haircut to happen, for someone to say something, you have to have a feeling. So to negate the science of feelings is about as sloppy a science as you can possibly imagine, because the very negation of the feelings by refusing to study the science of feeling is based on feelings. It's based on shame. When you have a cult that elevates the masculine and de-elevates the feminine, then in order to survive, feel secure, have love and belonging, you as a scientist pretend to value the masculine more than the feminine. So you will not study feelings, just like you won't study UFOs, you won't study psychedelics, you won't study anything that could be considered, however useful, fringe. You won't study alternative medicine. In fact, the very term alternative medicine, I mean, the big pharma has been around for 1/10 of a tenth of a tenth of the time of all of nature-based medicine. But rather than look at the science and say we're the alternative medicine because we're the least tested and tried, just says no. Everything we do is normal and anything anyone else does is alternative. So now that we've defined it that way, if you want to kind of be viewed as a little bit quacky, we're not going to mention anything too rudely, but we all know, right? In a chauvinistic cult, anything a little bit too feminine, that's not you're not going to get the grants, you're not going to win the awards, etc. You're not going to get the big money, which of course really means how important you are, and how long your penis is, of course. You're not going to get any of that. So you want to be in alternative medicine or the real medicine. And so, this is what cults have done throughout history. Don't think that the person with the big plate in their mouth is any different, than us with our bullshit. I mean, they look down your noses. You couldn't possibly be chief. You don't have a big plate in your mouth, you fool. You couldn't possibly be chief. Where's your Harvard degree? Where's your this, etc. And so every cult has its story. And every cult is incomplete. Every cult is irrational. That's what makes it a cult. If it was truly a science, then the very first thing that any cult would do would be to take objective surveys of every other cult around the world and decide, the Danish people are doing a better job with educating their people, we'll copy them there. The Danish job have a better maternity leave program, we'll copy them there as well. The Danish people have eliminated homelessness. We'll copy them. We'll also copy the Thais who have eliminated homelessness. A science doesn't reinvent the wheel because we're the ones who reinvent the wheel. No, a scientist that's intelligent is seeking to use data to benefit and help the well-being of its people. And there's no better way to do that than study success around the world and copy success and then innovate. The Japanese were brilliant at that. They took all the best American ideas, and then, when Deming and several other, when I think it was Deming, when several other the American teachers, America has this kind of thing of no one's going to tell me what to do. That's almost innate to American cultism. No one's going to tell me what to do. I'm an American. I'm a man. And whether it's a female or a male, it's the same thing. It's masculine energy. I'm my own person. It's so funny to travel around the world and be able to spot an American anyway, because they're all their own person, right? So, it's like the old Holy Grail joke in the Monty Python movie. It's like, Brian trying to tell them, you're an individual. Yes, Lord, we are all individuals. Just mindlessly, feeding back whatever they're fed. That's not, just because everyone's saying we're an individual doesn't mean that you've woken up and, connected to anything individual about you. There's nothing individual about following your parents to all obsess about being individuals. So in that pattern, we're not a science. We are a cult, and we're a cult in which the majority is always wrong, but always safe. So the time to invest in Microsoft, of course, was when everyone said it was a risky bet, and it kept making money and kept making money. And finally, everyone said, you can't go wrong with Microsoft. And that's, of course, when the majority is on and it no longer makes any money. And so you cannot be part of a majority and be on the bleeding edge of anything, period. And yet you can be in a majority and get help. That when all the banks are stupid, the government will bail you out. If you're just one bank in a minority, then you'll be punished. But that was Donald Trump's game as well with his bank. He owed them too much money, so they had to work out a settlement, etc. Because if they knocked him off, and that's one strategy of survival. Just screw so many people over and keep promising that you're the only way to get out of it, that that the little bit of waste that remains, other than you and your promises, is so little that you might as well have the hope that it'll get better. But as they've pointed out in the New York Times, Donald Trump was the only real estate tycoon who managed to lose money in the 80s. So how's it going to get any better by, reinstalling his loans? But of course, who cares about me or you or anyone else? He's figured that out. He's got his criminal immunity by occupying and scamming into the top role in a cult that rewards him for doing that. And that's the key thing to understand. People are not fools. When you're in a cult that rewards you for scraping your way, however unethically and all that, to the top, you're going to have people scraping their way to get there. And it's more fool the cult. You can't blame Donald Trump for being given the handout. If you're the president, you can break the law and nobody will give a damn or anything. But if you're anyone else and you need to break the law because you've been so abused into stupidity and arrogance, your father made you feel so small that the only way to have any sense of grandiosity was to to be so ostentatious as to manage to lose hundreds of millions of money in almost everything, but to look really important. That's the one thing Donald Trump is absolutely amazing at, is looking really big and important. Well, when a 4-year-old has as their greatest desire to not be invisible and hurt and have these horrible feelings and helplessness, etc., and to see that the only people that have any sense of bigness in our cult are money, that's the 4-year-old's dream. One day, I will be one of those big people, whatever it takes, whatever lie, I can't feel this small for the rest of my life. And that's the only way to do it. Look at Dad. He beats us and does this and that and the other, but nobody bothers him because he's got money, because he pays the salaries. That's what we need to do. So congratulations on Donald Trump's 4-year-old and his 6-year-old. Fooled us all. Isn't it wonderful? Thank heavens he figured out, the corrupt cult that we're a part of. He's not the enemy, though, that 4-year-old. The enemy is the fact that you and I can look at miserable children every day of the week and say they're not my problem. We're the enemy. As long as that continues, there are little boys right now dreaming that one day they'll have the money and they better hang on to it, because that's the only way they're going to get a smidgen of decency and value out of this fucked up cult. And when you've been beaten up and lied to and this and that and the other, and then humiliated for the feelings that come from beaten up, you get the message. And we raise a new a new race of, a new generation of dictators. And then we lament, as if this is somehow nothing to do with us. That is the problem. It's got nothing to do with us. It means you don't change anything. You don't change anything, the system continues. So the trauma equation, aside from the race, how is it that the entire black race was sold into slavery in the United States? Because someone decided they were different. Because someone decided they were different. The color of their skin. What was it about the Native American Indians that made them worthy of being lied to, breaking the law, mowing them down, turning against each other, etc.? Why were they different? But you can see the conundrum for any terrified young boy, young girl in our cult who has this history, this intergenerational weight, which you understand if you're not the right skin color, if you don't have the big enough plate, if you didn't have blonde hair, if your breasts weren't a certain size, if there's anything but your humanity, basically. In a sociopathic cult, it doesn't have to do with your humanity. That's the one thing that's innate to us all, and so that's the one thing that doesn't count. Your breast size counts. If you're a model and you can lose 2 inches from deeper anorexia, suddenly you get all the jobs. That counts. But if you're a human being, we've never really. What are you good for? You're a human being. Okay. How are you going to make us money? How are you going to make us look good? We don't need you. Go away. We don't want human beings. We want people with breast size this. You didn't win that lottery, and so and this is of course the emphasis on the masculine. How are you useful? Not what is your presence. There's no Forbes Fortune 400 list of the most beautiful present women and people on the planet. I mean, sure, there's Miss Universe, but present human beings? Non-sex object human beings? And of course, the Miss Universe and all that isn't as important as the Forbes 400 list, the people who have the most paper. We've got to focus on them because we all know that money is more important than human beings. So the human beings connected to the money are important, not because they're important, but because their money is important. You're not important because your name is Gates. You're important because you're connected with money. You were never important. The money is important. So you're connected to the money. Of course, you're very important. You're not. This is why so many rich people feel so suicidal. They get it. It's not about them. No one gives a damn about them any more than they give a damn with the homeless. They give a damn about their money. And that's a very deep wound to digest. When you really get it, that people could give a shit about you, but they could give a great deal about the car you're driving, the money you have. My goodness, so lonely. You don't matter. Your bits of paper matter. That's the cult ranking system. And your feelings about that, they don't matter either. You're a celebrity and you understand that, you're getting all this special treatment. You feel like shit. No one wants to understand your feelings about that. Put on the performance. You're supposed to talk about this and this and this. And it's so painful. This is why, let's just start drinking and kill ourselves. Because it's just so sad. How did we get to be a cult that valued the things that people make more than the people that made them? Wasn't that the whole moral of the goose that laid the golden egg? That the goose is more valuable than the golden eggs that it laid? That a human being is more valuable than the bits of paper that it makes, than the bits of clothing that it makes? And, my goodness. Are we still on that moral of that story? We haven't gotten it? That the Creator is bigger than that which is created? That all the money in the world doesn't matter a bit if there's no people to buy and ooh and ah about it. It's the people oohing and ahhing that matters. It's not the money. We just, as cults, decide what we're going to ooh and ah about. And we've decided we're going to ooh and ah about bits of paper. And so if you have lit bits of paper, It's the people that matter. You got all that paper so that people would ooh and ah. If we're so unsophisticated as a cult that that's really the only thing we'll ooh and ah about, then of course you went out and got the money. What else are you supposed to do? Because we're too dumb to ooh and ah you for being a great and amazing human being. And so there will be no list of the 400 most great and amazing human beings. There should be. We could start one today. It just never seems to occur to us. You could do it. I could do it. Why not? Never seems to occur to us. So in the pack mammalian species dynamic, 200,000 years ago, a million years ago, you have a dynamic where, for example, the monkey wanders out of the pack and the lion's waiting for that. And so there's a biological thing that when you stray from the majority, you not only have your history, like if you're like you marry interracial. Well, if you're in a country that, if you take Trevor Noah's story, see, it was a crime for his mother to mate a Swiss man. It was a crime. So he was an illegal phenomena. Well, when you learn that you get extra poor treatment, etc., for violating the cult, for something as as bizarre as skin color. Who said cults were intelligent? Every single cult in the history of humanity has been wrong. That's about, it's not, there hasn't even been one. There hasn't been a single cult that got it right. And we think we're the one? Every cult in human history has thought that. The Romans thought they were the greatest. The Greeks thought every single one was wrong. But we're, of course, the one out of 9,999 that got it right. The hubris, the terror of admitting the truth, the terror is incredible. The hubris, incredible. So, in a pack mammalian species, you die if you diverge from the herd. The predators get the outliers. And this is part of our biology. And it's one of the reasons why shame is so important. Shame is, you don't belong here. We're not going to defend you if you're a pedophile, if you're black, if you're someone that got caught stealing from the IRS. If you don't get caught, we'll defend you and put you on the Forbes 400 list. But if you do get caught, well, then you have to be president for us to protect you. And so pack mammalian species equals need of the pack to survive, equals survival threatened by exclusion, equals cultural codependency. We need our cult, which means we need the majority, who has, by definition, always been wrong. But we need them in order to survive, because you see, when the Germans said that the whole Jewish race couldn't go shopping and their stores were confiscated, if you were part of the minority that got knocked out, you couldn't survive. Because it wasn't like you were just going out and foraging in nature. No, you were buying from the majority. And when blacks couldn't sit down in this part of the bus or had to have their own, if the restroom was full, etc., you were just out. If you get beaten up and killed and raped and all this because of this and hung and burned alive, well, it's a deterrent. Cultural codependency. This is dangerous simply because no cult has ever been correct. By definition, the majority in any cult is doing things suboptimally. The way is always led by the minority, and this is one of the reasons why the intelligence of a cult can be measured by the intelligence of the kindness with which the majority treats its minorities. Minorities have always led the way forward. the bleeding edge is defined by a minority position. If you think of the edge of a sword, the bleeding edge, the cutting edge, is the tiniest part of the sword, but it is the most important part of the sword if you want to cut something. And that is a minority position. Now, the trouble with cults is they're too dumb to know which minority is the correct minority, which is why an intelligent cult needs to treat all of its minorities well. And one of them will be the bleeding edge. Since the majority, by definition, is too dumb to understand its own bleeding edge, at least at our level of cultural evolution, the best approach is to treat every minority well. Gays, homosexuals, feminists, right-wingers, treat them all well. And one of them is going to be your bleeding edge, take you into the future. Treat all your sensitives well. And one of them will be the next Nikola Tesla, the next Elon Musk, the next Bill Gates, etc., or the next something that we haven't even heard of. One of them will take us into the future. And of course, we're still in the chauvinism that these would all be men. How about the women, and where would they take us? It takes a greater degree of humility to honor and pay deference to a sensitive woman. So this is what leads us into the torture cell of our cult. Now, what is the torture cell or shamed by our cult? You see, that's what does the cult's ranking system look like? We knew in Ireland it was anything pagan and unorthodox and anything ritualistic, anything of the body, anything of the woman. In all of the main religions, it would be anything female. That would be heresy. As long as the top is a man, then it's fine. Anything else is heresy. And so, of course, in some of the pagan traditions, women had equal rights of all horrors, and so they were beyond the pale. And so shamed by our cult, excluded by our cult, not supported, not fought for, disowned by the cult. This is a traumatic event. It is an experience of being separate from oneself. Because for those of us that find ourselves in minority positions of any kind, we're the only one that knows this part of the truth. We're the only one that understands that all gays and homosexuals are not, perverted human beings. We're the only one that understand the connection between childhood abuse and pedophilia, for example, and the way that abuse cycle, when uninterrupted intelligently, will continue. That it takes the violation of the feminine and the shaming of, etc., for that to continue. We're the only one that understand that. And so if we're treated with honor and share that wisdom with the majority has the opportunity to grow, to reintegrate, to become stronger. That which is excluded in the illusion of garbage makes us weaker. The more we exclude, the more we divide and weaken the self. This is the message of all time. And yet, in short-term political gambits, divide and conquer is good for the ego of the politician in a fear-based cult, even as it damages the culture, even as it damages the country. Donald Trump is just learning from Hitler what works, because it works. It's not like they're making up the rules. Hitler didn't make up the rules. We do. When we don't deal with our fear as human beings, because we don't teach fear literacy in school, because we make understanding fear shameful, because we don't deal with it, then we create a culture that is ripe for a Hitler, for a dictator of one form or another. So shamed by our cult, we come down to femininity. In our cult, everything feminine is lower ranking than masculine. And so we have need and dependency juxtaposed to I don't need anything. And so what do young boys and girls say in our cult as they are humiliated and find themselves? I don't need anything. That's the defense. They feel a desperate need for acceptance, for securities, for the bully to stop bullying them. But what they say is the opposite of what they feel, because if they're caught in a dependent need position, they're immediately deranked. You can play, financial predatory games or bullying games and sociopathic games, and we then turn these into reality shows. You play these games, and it is the one in the feminine position that is lower ranked. So if you are needy and dependent, you get lower ranked, which encourages lying, because every single human being has needs. But as soon as you tell someone about them, your ranking goes down and you get shamed, well, then you encourage lying. This is, one reason why our cult as a majority is guaranteed to be wrong, is because it rewards lying. There is a whole series of generations in the American cult that are committed to lying to project an image of invulnerability and masculinity in both men and women that has nothing to do with the felt reality, simply to avoid the shame of an ignorant cult that doesn't honor the feminine. So in our cult, we attack the feminine, so we attack need and dependency. We also attack you if you're helpless. We avoid you, etc. If you're helpless, like just look at millions of American homeless, etc. Like, yeah, we're not gonna. You're helpless. Why do I need you? It's like you're lower ranking, out of control. We look at the way we love military dynamics, and it's all about that, proving we're in control. Which is fine. You're in control of the missile. It landed exactly where you wanted. It destroyed the lives of exactly 100,000 people. It's like, aren't you smart? And the cluster bomb exploded at exactly 5.2 seconds. And, when you have this thing, it's all about this illusion that you can control everything. And I'm the military. I pressed the button at exactly 5.2 seconds. And if you look at the fascination with control within the cult, it's all about precision. It's all about precision. This fascination, even around the world in 80 days, Phileas Fogg. What's with that? At exactly 5.2 seconds in the morning, he did this and this and this. And of course, he was a hero because he maintained control, because nothing threw him off, etc. And so if you're out of control, you're in feminine terrain because you're in unknown terrain. Now, the known, I know. I knew that. See, you wonder why men lie all the time. Someone tells them something they obviously didn't know. Their behavior suggests they didn't know. And they say, I knew that. I knew that. And I knew this as well. Why the lying? Why pretend that you know something you don't know? Except if the unknown is shamed, is a low-ranking position. If not to know, if ignorance is a low-ranking position. And of course, the disgust, the snobbishness around the world that the city dwellers, direct towards the provinces, etc. It's happening in the Philippines right now. You're a province. You're a province citizen. You come into a city like Manila, and every single person around you looks at you as a second-class citizen. Why? Because you don't know. Don't know what? The crime, the dirt, the grime, the stupidity, the latest scams of the city? Yeah, you don't know that. That's what you don't know. You still know a wholesome life from farms and doing agriculture, and you know how to take care and respect your families. We all know that's bullshit in the city. But you don't know that, so you're a second-class citizen. You don't know. We're all from Harvard around here. You from your little pissant, you think you know? You don't hang out with the people. And so we have this snobbishness. We have our own little pales of, just being outside and beyond the pale is automatic snobbery in a self-referential loop, which is, of course, the British defined what was beyond the pale. And now, if you're beyond the pale, you're automatically a second-class citizen. The pharmaceuticals define what is alternative medicine. Well, now you're in the alternative group. It's like, do you want to be in the real group or the alternative group? Well, it's all self-referential. That's the crown of being at the pinnacle of any cult, is the cult defines what's good by itself. There's nothing intelligent about the United States being the only country in the civilized world not to have maternity leave, let alone maternity leave for both parents. It's unique in its stupidity. There's nothing wonderful about that. And yet, when the cult can define the cult by just saying, well, it's just un-American, we're not talking about what makes people feel good. We're talking about what is American. Well, what is American? What we are. So whatever dumbass thing you come up with is American because it's what you came up with. Yeah, and that's what we're proud of. The most obese, the most this, the most people in jail per capita. We're just proud. We're proud of being what we are. It's self-referential as opposed to science. Science is always referencing the bigger narrative outside itself. That's what makes science a threat to the church when it emerged, because it didn't reference the church. The church referenced the church. Science referenced something bigger than the church. Cults' primary role in people's lives is to maintain a status quo. So if they reference science and something bigger than themselves, they're always changing. Well, then people get scared of change because they're afraid of the feminine. In a chauvinistic cult, there is nothing more dangerous than the feminine. And that includes change. That includes the unknown. So how do you stop people looking at change and the unknown? You punish them for not knowing anything. You make them hide their ignorance and be ashamed of it. And so we have helpless, out of control ignorance and its correlation with the unknown. We have feelings. The more emotional you are, give me a break. Where's the logic? You see, the stupidity of the rational argument is that rationality isn't enough. You actually have to have a feeling. You have to have an ideal to motivate any conscious human action. There's plenty of people that know that smoking is a bad idea and they take another puff, and it is not because nicotine is endlessly addictive. It's because the feelings they would face on the other side of the addiction. I mean, who sticks little bits of paper and burnt plants in their mouth and inhales smoke to begin with and says, oh, that's a great idea. Grape juice, organic orange juice has nothing on this. I have a better idea. I'm going to burn foul-smelling plants, stick it in my mouth, and breathe smoke in. I don't want fresh grape juice. I don't want, a beautiful croissant with butter. No. I want to taste something foul. That's the kind of person I am. I mean, who does that except people looking around and noticing that everyone's paying attention to the sophisticated smoker? And if they're not, then the advertisers come on and say, you too can look cool. You can be high on the sociopathic continuum if you put little burnt bits of foul-smelling plants into your mouth and delay conversation. Someone asks you a question, and rather than saying, I'm too dumb to come up with an answer or whatever this, I'm busy smoking burnt, foul-smoking plants. It's like, well, you see, I'm already superior because the advertisers told you so. That's how superior I am. I take advertisers, with different stuff because you didn't know I was superior until the advertisers told you I was, and so, monkeys look around at what everyone else is doing because monkeys survived 200,000 years ago that way. And so feelings, obviously, inferior. Failure is inferior. I'm so ashamed. I've been caught failing. Because if you were caught failing, it means you didn't know everything. And if you didn't know anything, you're useless because you're feminine. The unknown is feminine terrain. The known is masculine terrain. So you didn't know anything. You're useless. You're feminine. The smartest people in the world, are humble enough to understand exactly how much they don't know. Because the more you know, you can't help but be hit by the fact of how little you know. Because what we know is a percent of 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 the unknown. The unknown is 99% of all that is. The known, particularly when we're talking about the human ego, a tiny little dot. But we don't want to be caught not knowing. We don't want to be caught out in the vastness of the feminine. So we're ashamed. We're vulnerable. We don't want to admit we're vulnerable. No one can hurt me. The victims of the Catholic priests. There's a correlation where a lot of them were really buff. The victims of priests. As young boys that were molested. A lot of them worked out at the gym a lot. Because no one's going to hurt me. Because they were deeply hurt that their spiritual teacher betrayed them and that their parents didn't notice and didn't bother to ask them any questions and everyone made deals with the church and the church. There's an incredible amount of betrayal and hurt there. But that's feminine. So I'm just going to go to the gym and show just how masculine I am. Don't anyone pay attention to my hurt and my vulnerability. Look at my muscles. No one can hurt me. I'm going to drive a hot rod as well, and drive a monster truck and do this and that. How far do you have to go into absurdity? To understand you can't drive a monster truck on the road. Your 240-mile-an-hour Lamborghini is stuck in the same traffic as a 60-mile-an-hour car because the traffic never goes over 60 miles an hour in heavy traffic. What's with this? What's with this? No one's going to question that because we're dealing with shame. Pain, fear, and hurt. If you're in pain, something wrong with you. In olden times, they would kill the deformity. You're born with a toe that's a little bit off. Yeah, he's going to be a liability to the tribe. Whack, dead. And so there's, as empathy starts to be, as the human animal moves into the human being, and empathy, people trying to hide that which is blossoming, like there's something good in my son, even though he's got a broken toe, even though his arm is never going to, throw a spear. Maybe he'll type and invent the cure to AIDS, but that's in the future, etc. And we are limitations. We don't have the imagination to know what this person is good at, so let's kill him. Which, of course, if the group of the elders decide to kill that baby, that's the terror of violating the group thing, whether it's innate or conscious. It's like, I transgressed the boundary. In the United States, we don't like, it's a mixed thing. We don't like a weak victim. Now, if you win and get $26 million for McDonald's in court, whatever it is, then, what they ultimately settled was much less and all that. But we don't like a weak victim. So if you feel really weak and insecure and you've been hurt by someone, there's a tendency to want to hide it because we don't want to deal with that. If you're gullible, we often shout at people who were scammed. You idiot, you don't answer the phone, you don't. We abuse people who are gullible. We don't do anything to address the shrewd, the wolf. We say, of course there are wolves. We're in a sociopathic cult. You're dumb for being gullible. You're dumb for trusting. You're dumb for believing in humanity, you fool. And similarly, child regression. Children are not as sophisticated as adults, as you will have learned over the last 500 years in any Western culture. Children are seen and not heard. They're idiots. They're not as important. They'll grow out of it. Children have been systematically and cruelly abused until the flip to the other side of parents running their own lives and needing their child's approval, needing their child to be their lover, their spouse, etc. The flip to the other side. Children have been treated incredibly cruelly in our cult over the last 500 years, either by being over-pampered, but never being supported in the development of their feminine side, of half of who they are, the yin. The emotional, the relational, the receptive, the biological, the ecological, all these sciences that relate to well-being. You'll study calculus, but you won't learn to cook. Cooking would nourish the body. Calculus drains the body. It's not as direct. So you have a cult, particularly in our Western cult, that shames the feminine. And some of this is ecological, meaning the feminine is the spontaneity and it is the emotional. Well, who feels like chopping wood in July? Anyone have that feeling like, I just love stopping swimming and making love and eating and stuff, and I want to go cut some wood? Well, the trouble is, in a northern climate, is July turns into December, and then if you didn't chop any wood, you're dead. And so you start elevating the individuals in the cult that thought ahead. And those are the people who dissociate from their feminine side and embrace strategic thinking. Strategic thinking is not coming out of the emotion of joy in the moment. It's coming out of fear. Fear of the future. There's going to be a winter, and if we don't do this, we're in deep shit. And so you have strategic thinking coming out of fear and survival by people with the awareness of time, of the future. I want to do this now, but I'm going to put that aside. I'm going to put my feminine part aside, and I'm going to do what I don't want to do. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to do this. And we push it, into these bizarre extremes of self-loathing and self-punishment. But at the crux of it, there is a biological awareness that in cold climates, unlike, for example, Asia, where there's much more feminine energy, and you're not punished. If you're in Thailand and you don't worry about the future, you just go out and fish, and it's warm, and you stay at another you're not punished. You may be shamed in a cult that is starting to become more hierarchical and stuff, but you're not. Nature doesn't punish you for being feminine. Nature rewards you. You have a much better time if you do what you feel like doing and build your relationships, etc. And so you have happier cultures in more temperate climates. And then you have foreigners coming in and exploiting that. That can be used. You can be turned into a slave. You can be hired in this and that and the other, and you've got to do this and this and this, or I'll hurt you. You've got strategic thinking coming in from climates where if you don't think about the future, you die. Okay, so as we turn our attention to the expression of shame, the expression of exclusion, how does our culture communicate the fact that we're outside of its boundary? One is a collusion, meaning we're always looking for this majority pattern. And so that majority pattern is guiding us to what will be accepted and loved and belonging. So the body language, the collusion of body language, watching the people turn away, etc., watching the people look away as if somehow there's something shameful. And when a large group does this in response to an individual, normally, in order to survive, feel secure, feel a sense of love and belonging, the individual will take it on. And so collusion. Apathy is another way that, particularly if we're in pain, and there's an apathy around us, there's a sense of shame. So I'm in the unknown, I'm terrified, I'm in pain, etc., but apathy. Turning away. You need something. So, we look at the different needs and dependencies like our homeless. So you desperately need to survive. You need to feel secure. You need a sense of love and belonging. You don't have any of that. You're homeless. We turn away to church, to all these other things but you. So if you're in this category, we turn away. Judgment. Not of me or the cult. One of the sad ironies of a cult is it's got the whole majority behind it. So it's got mass. So it can dominate by sheer mass. In a tug of war, whoever has the most mass wins. So the cult has mass. But rather than questioning itself, many in a cult, if you have needs that an individual doesn't want to meet, if you are dependent and someone doesn't want you to be or feel dependent on them, if you feel helpless and they don't want to help, if you feel out of control and that makes them nervous, if you are ignorant and they want you to know so that either they don't have to teach or they don't have to acknowledge how big the unknown is, if you have feelings and they don't know how to respond to the feelings in an emotionally illiterate culture, if you are failing and reminding them of just how big the unknown is and that they're likely to fail as well. If you're vulnerable and they don't like being aware of their own vulnerability, if you're in pain, fear, and hurt, and they don't know how to respond and feel a sense of inadequate, if you are victimized by the culture's abuse, but they don't know what to do, if you are gullible and that leads to pain, or if you are regressed into a childlike state, remembering past trauma, etc., and they don't understand what regression is, all of this creates fear, pain, etc. And the trouble with the bullying of the majority is that when you have a whole cult that is involved with this level of ignorance and with pat standard answers, it can just judge you as being, well, you're one of the homeless, it's your fault, or you're an unemployed woman on welfare having children, it's your fault. It's you're a child being abused by your Catholic priest, it's your fault, or your Episcopal priest, or whatever, it's your fault. That if you were somehow better than you are, if you weren't so shameful, you would not be presenting yourself in this way that we as a cult don't know how to deal with, but also don't know how to admit. Because remember, when you have a chauvinistic cult that determines that not knowing something is somehow less than knowing something, they can't admit that they don't know how to help. And so what they do is project their own inadequacy to help onto you. Somehow there's something wrong with you. We would be helping you, but there's something wrong with you. It's not that we don't teach emotional literacy in school. It's not that no parent is required to take any kind of psychological exam before being given a helpless infant. No, none of that has anything to do with us. It's you that is the problem. And with that comes disgust. I can't even look at it. It's like, those horrible people. Get them out of my town, do this. And parents looking at their children like that, it's like, how could you dress like this? The disgust. Refusing to feel. This is a big one. If you're in extraordinary amounts of pain and shame, etc., and you look around and no one is empathizing, no one is acknowledging, no one is feeling what you're feeling and letting that matter. The message is, you don't matter, you don't belong. If you did, we would feel what you feel. So when no one feels, empathizes, or responds out of that feeling, the message is very clear. You don't belong. That is a traumatic message in a culture where without a sense of love and belonging, your needs do not get met unless perhaps you have money and you've got a sociopathic, if you've got money, people out of their own sociopathic fear will meet your needs because the money is important to them. Not my problem is another thing. That's not my problem, that's your problem, as opposed to it's our problem. It's not inviting, or, so simply not inviting you to the group. I see who you are. You're not welcome in our group. We are a group of very sophisticated, unemotional, Mensa categorized men. So you don't belong to that. Now, if you did, we would, of course, care about you and do some things, but you don't, so we won't. Criticism. Something wrong with you. You don't belong because of this, and this. And it's lucky if that is verbalized, because then you can debate that. So often it's a look. It's all turn away from that person and all understand why we're turning away. They're poor. They're on welfare. They're not our kind of people. So let's just turn away. Low priority is another way of doing this. I would love to help you, but I'm playing tennis this afternoon. And after that, I'm going out to dinner. Then I'm watching Seinfeld reruns. And then I'm having a drink. You see, and there's just no time. I would love to respond to the crisis of dignity and the crisis of panic and your trauma and this and that and the other, the fact that you don't know what's going on. I'd love to be able to take some time, but it's a precise sequence of events. The tennis leads to the dinner, and the dinner leads to the Seinfeld reruns, and the drink, and my little titillation porn, and I just don't have time. I'm very busy for this. Now, as soon as someone high-ranking contacts me, oh my gosh, a billionaire wants to talk with me. They could be a complete and utter jerk, but a billionaire, my goodness. Of course I have time. No, and just ruin my meditation routine. And just, no, of course, there's no inconvenience. You're a famous person. You're a high-ranking member of our sociopathic cult. So of course there's no trouble at all. And of course it's very easy to be, somewhat magnanimous when although it's mixed, when you realize it's all your money and it's not really about you at all. And that's why you're so afraid of losing your money, because who would you be without all of that in a cult that opens doors because of that? Not because of who we are. And this is, of course, the poverty. The poverty of our cult is everyone understands that we have magnificently beautiful homeless people, and we have magnificently beautiful children without any money and without good parenting, etc. We have magnificent wealth of presence, wisdom, and feminine energy. But we don't value it. We behave as if that means nothing, and that hurts us. That hurts us as a culture. So this is the expression of the shame. And, of course, the shame is one of you don't belong. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the formulas. So if you take a trigger, and if, of course, in a trauma illiterate culture, we don't know what a trigger is. But if you take a trigger, something that associates through the biology of the body back to a traumatic incident. So you have trigger plus unresolved childhood trauma plus trauma illiterate culture equals regression. Now, once you regress, for example, if your trauma happened at age 3, a 3-year-old is now dealing with an adult situation. Meaning the adult you, the grown-up you, isn't there. You're now 3 years old. Well, as soon as you feel 3 years old, you feel overwhelmed. That's how 3-year-olds feel. You feel dependent. 3-year-olds are dependent. So equals dependency. Now, when dependency plus age regression and traumatic illiteracy combines, you get a violation, meaning nobody notices that you're feeling 3 years old, which means that you are expected to act like an adult when you are in fact 3 years old, which means you do a bad job and you feel shame because you can't do it. You don't know how to do it. You're overwhelmed. So it creates shame. Now, that shame and that fear, the juxtaposition of realizing that you're terrified and you don't know how to interact, and you need help, but you are surrounded by complete morons who don't know how to help, because complete morons are the kind of people that would live in a culture that is completely traumatically illiterate, is emotionally illiterate, that can't tell the difference between whether you're behaving as a 45-year-old or a 3-year-old. They don't notice your eyes. They don't notice the face. They don't notice the shift. I mean, when a monkey can notice these postures as different submission and ranking, dynamics within the pack, how sociopathically do you have to be trained in your culture before you, as a much more sophisticated human being, fail to notice that someone's looking at you as if they're 3 years old? It's very easy to see unless you've been brainwashed into ignoring it. Meaning every time you just focus on the feminine terrain and feelings, you lose ranking, so you stop looking in that terrain. So you have, this leads to acting inappropriately or acting out. You're 3-year-old, you're terrified, you're in a triggered dynamic. Now, of course, you're in a triggered dynamic because your parents didn't know how to release the biological chemicals right after a traumatic event by shaking, all the ways that animals do, for example, freezing, shaking, running, to release those systems so they're still in your body. So when they build up over time, they're still able to hook you, particularly in traumatic moments of shock, etc. So when you have a traumatically illiterate culture, you have traumatically illiterate parents. So the trauma becomes PTSD or complex PTSD, or gets dissociated and locked in the child's biology. Well, now you have acting out as they're responding as the 3-year-old, which then leads to judgmental and exclusion. So we have all the different arsenals that calls for back to say, oh, they didn't behave very mature. Why couldn't they be more mature? Well, because they were born into a traumatically illiterate cult, which made absolutely sure that every time they were traumatized, the chemicals got stuck in their body. And then it made absolutely sure that no one in the cult understood trauma. And then it decided that anyone who did any of that stuff was weird and shamed people, which traumatized them again. That's why they're acting out. But see, if we knew that, we wouldn't be a traumatically illiterate cult, and we'd actually be intelligent. And so what we do is we punish the people who violate our cult rules. They didn't respond appropriately, so we punish them. So now you have more shame, because now you're saying you're going to be shamed for being shamed and expressing regression about being shamed, and then we're going to shame you again, which will regress you again, and then we'll be in an endless self-referential loop where we know why we shamed you, because you still didn't respond appropriately. When we shamed you, you still responded inappropriately to our shame, and so that just shows why we've excluded you. And so that equals threat to social fabric, which then damages your self-image. When no one appropriate, when all the sophisticated people don't want anything to do with you, there's a sense like there's something wrong with me. All these cool, immature, unemotional, unfeminine people don't want anything to do with me. And so we have a threat to the social fabric, which damages self-image. There must be something wrong with me. This is the child regression dynamic. My parents are fucked up. No, they couldn't be. They couldn't possibly be fucked up. I must be unlovable. And so then you have the threat to self-image. But when you believe you're unlovable, you've now got a brain that's committed to making that a reality, because that's what the brain does. you set out beliefs, I am unlovable, or I am worthy, or I am unworthy, whatever the belief is, and your brain is going to figure out how to have a reality and integrity with that belief. So you say you're unlovable because you're in a cult where nobody has the sophistication to love you. And now your brain is going to tell you that it's true because it's going to help you create a reality in which nobody loves you. Well, that isn't a reality in which you are rich and can take care of yourself. That could be too close to self-love, or value. And so it's going to create maybe a homeless dynamic where, see, I'm unlovable, that's why I'm homeless, and I'm homeless because I'm unlovable, and I'm unlovable because I'm homeless. And, now you're in a self-referential loop. So you've got survival. Now you've got trauma. Now, another path is causing trauma plus trauma ignorance equals PTSD. So that's obvious. You traumatize someone, they need to physiologically release it or it becomes PTSD. Okay, so you put them in an ignorant culture where they're shamed. Like if they shake, they say, calm down. Or if you're trying to run, they say, don't you, or I'll hit you. And now you can't release the chemicals because you'll be hit again by, a trauma illiterate bully, who happens to be your father. So now you've got PTSD. Now PTSD leads to dysfunction. It is a disease. It leads to being able to having to dissociate from parts, to not being able to have the body work. So now you have dysfunction. And the dysfunction leads to two important things in our cult. One is loss of income. If you're dysfunctional in some way, you will not be promoted into a leadership position. So you will be at the low end of the income or lose your job. The second thing is loss of friends, because that's what we do in America when we have a dysfunctional purpose. We say, well, I'm not going to be their friend, and we abandon them. Well, this, of course, escalates the shame and the trauma, which escalates the dysfunctionality, and we say, see, I told you so, that's why we're not friends. So we don't ever apologize for our cult and say, it's kind of shitty that we require your parents to have a driver's license to protect their cars from getting into accidents. But we don't require them to have a children's license that requires them to take certain psychological tests to show that they know how to empathize, that they are not addicted to cocaine, some basic physiological tests to say, you're not ready to run the life of an infant in a dependent relationship in which they're going to die if you don't know what you're doing, and you clearly don't know what you're doing. You're not ready for that. So we apologize for not requiring a license, whether or not you want the state to decide who can and cannot have children, perhaps at least a scoring system or giving the parents the best statistical data. 90% of all alcoholics traumatize their children. You are an alcoholic. You want to bet that you're one of the 10% that isn't going to do it? Well, okay, and that gives your child, also some basis to be furious. It's like, how dare you? How dare you go ahead and have a child when you're an alcoholic, when you have explosive rage dynamic, when you have PTSD without, how dare you go ahead and give me all that disease and you had all the statistics? Well, I didn't have any of the statistics. I'm willfully ignorant in a willfully ignorant culture. See, so then the child just feels shitty, like, what's wrong with me? And that's, dysfunctional. So equals dysfunction equals pain. See, when all your friends abandon you because you got PTSD and it doesn't feel very good, well, then your pain goes up. Now, in a relationally, emotionally, and psychologically illiterate culture, which, by the way, is also traumatically illiterate, when pain goes up, addiction goes up. That's a guarantee. Now, if you have an emotionally, traumatically, relationally illiterate culture, first of all, your friends don't abandon you when you're in trauma. They actually circle around and get you out of the PTSD. That's what intelligent people do. Because intelligent people understand the viral nature of emotions and understand that human beings are carriers of disease. And if you've got someone who's diseased, who's just broadcasting hepatitis or whatever, or tuberculosis, anywhere around, it doesn't stay in that individual. If you have someone with PTSD in your midst, you have someone who's giving other people PTSD. And then they're giving other people PTSD. So if you don't want to have PTSD or want a cult filled with people with PTSD, as soon as you spot the dis-ease called PTSD, and you understand that trauma and with it shame is a core component, then you circle around those individuals and you help them out of the quagmire created by the cult's very ignorant protocol. So, but in a cult that is illiterate in all those areas, you now have addiction. And now you have a cult that then shames people who are addicts, asking them to keep secret. Addiction plus shame plus secrecy equals failure and deeper addiction, and deeper self-abuse, which leads to deeper other abuse, which then leads to more shame because now there's more failure. That leads to death. So you have panic and you have trauma and you have this don't push me into this tailspin of a cult. So you also have the dynamic of a cult where when there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of shame in the average person, show me the American who isn't shame-based. When you have a lot of shame and pain in the average person, and you have sensitives in an emotional denial cult, then the sensitives are going to be feeling the functioning as a microphone. They're going to pick up the vibration of shame and pain all around them, 1. 2, they're going to look around and say, is there pain and shame all around me? And everyone's going to say, no, I'm fine. No pain and shame around here. They're going to say, wow, I must be the only one, because I can't deny that I feel a lot of pain and shame. And I'm all alone here, and every time I try and talk about it, everyone abandons me. Nobody wants me to be here. And a sensitive is really tuned in to what other people want because they feel it so loudly. And so everyone wants me not to exist. What they're really saying is, I don't want my own pain and shame to exist, and you're bringing it up that I'm in a denial pattern, so could you just please go away? But everyone's doing that to the sensitive because that's coming up. So the sensitive can feel like, oh, the best thing I could do is go numb, let me become an alcoholic, or I could commit suicide. And then none of you would have to deal with your own feelings coming through my microphone and showing up on my amplifier. And then you'd be so happy because you could, carry on with your own addictions and you wouldn't notice anything, which is the whole point of addictions, to numb a chronically dysfunctional cult system that creates massive amounts of pain for the majority of people and then lacks the complete coherency about what to do about it. That is completely and utterly dysfunctional, creating massive amounts of pain for the vast majority of people, while simultaneously rendering them completely incapable of responding to the massive amounts of pain and then shaming them for the failure and the pain that produces. It is guaranteed to create utmost misery for a large percentage of people. And then when a sensitive picks it up and feels that, no, you're the problem, we're fine. Go off and kill yourself so that, we don't want to be reminded of this. And so we have that dynamic. Now, these are just a couple of the traumatic equations. But a lot of them tie in with the age regression dynamic. Because, for example, as soon as you're in a regressed state, you're in a dependent state. As soon as you're in a dependent state, you feel dependent on the giants around you. As soon as you feel dependent on the giants around you, you're in an abuse contract vulnerable state, which basically says, what do I have to do so that you will help me and not hurt me? And some people will say, well, you need to fuck me. That's the price. Okay, I'll do it. Some people say, you've got to humiliate yourself. I feel sadistic and angry. I want someone to humiliate themselves. Do it. You humiliate yourself and I'll help you. 3-year-old does it, And so you're vulnerable to the sociopathic rage built up in a dysfunctional cult when you feel very small. And the predator aspect of the internalized abuser in an abuse cult seeks that and says, I've got you where I want you. You're going to pay. You're going to squirm in this and that and the other, etc. And it's a power game where I want to be on top. I don't know how to heal this. I don't know how to give back all the rage that I don't know what to do with. I don't know how to give back the shame. I don't know how to stop feeling like a shit. I don't know how to stop feeling unworthy. I don't know how to stop feeling so inadequate and endlessly thing. But I do know how to make you feel how I feel. And I know how to recognize someone who can be predated because you put out the exact same vibe as me at 3 years old. That's how I recognize you. You're like me at 3 years old. I hate my 3-year-old. My 3-year-old is always coming up and making me feel like a shit, and then everyone abandons and hates me and all that, and I feel uncool, and I lose my high-ranking status because of my inner 3-year-old, my 5-year-old. I hate it. I hate my feminine side. And so you're going to be punished because now you're regressed at 3 years old. Good. Now you feel all the things that I don't want to feel. And so you get locked in an abuse contract. What do I have to do to survive? Well, you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do this. And then we're disgusted at you because you did it. That's, but if you don't, we're disgusted at you for being 3 years old. So it's a very, very vulnerable thing in the level of hatred and hostility in our cult, and it can become a vicious loop. Why am I doing this? This person is a sociopath. Why do I show up at their house? Because you feel 3 years old. And because they're in a sociopathic state, which feels safer than an empathic, regressed 3-year-old. Because when someone's in a sociopathic state, they'll kill someone if they feel like it, if it suits them. Well, to some extent, when surrounded by sociopaths, and you have to understand that if you're 3 years old and no one's helping you, you understand viscerally that you're surrounded by sociopaths, because only sociopaths leave a 3-year-old in that kind of helpless situation. That's what the very definition of a sociopath. So if you are a 3-year-old and you're repeatedly traumatized and left there, you've understood by 3 years old that you're in a sociopathic world. Now, a 3-year-old can't deal with a sociopathic world. This is a crippling realization, which is what creates the trauma, the fixation, the addiction, the PTSD, the massive amounts of terror and pain that they then can't grow up emotionally because it's so overwhelming. This is a vicious downward circle. And so, so in this dynamic, it is the sociopath within us that says, fuck this. I am not, I'm going to figure out the system. I'm going to figure out the game. I'm going to screw my feelings. I'm going to screw everyone else's feelings, and I'm going to do what works. And it works. In a sociopathic system, you play with power dynamics. It works. It feels absolutely miserable. It feels absolutely lonely. It feels absolutely sad and depressing and filled with overwhelming grief that that's the game you have to play. It's horrible, which discourages feelings, because when you feel feelings, it's so horrible that you have to play that game. I have to do this and this and this and this so I can do this and this and this. It's so horrible. And that's the only way I survived. So, there's a whole range of different responses here, but one of them comes, you get regressed, terrified, and you've got different predatory sociopaths trying to say, do this, this, this. I'll give you a little attention. Children need attention. I'll give you a little attention if you walk naked through the streets with a dog collar. Oh, let's see if she does it. The sociopath is very interested in that. She's 3 years old. She wants love and attention. Will you give me love and attention? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. There'll be photographs and videos. And, it's just incredibly sad how brutally we treat the inner 3-year-old, externalized into anyone in a regressed state, which is anyone who's had a traumatic trigger. And we don't produce people who don't have traumatic triggers. Everyone is beholden to some locked up traumatic trigger in a cult that refuses to deal with its trauma and that creates the level of dysfunction that we've got.